Eleanor Vance had always found a quiet rhythm in her life, a comforting predictability that mirrored the meticulous nature of her profession. For 10 years, she'd been an internal auditor at Sterling Financial Group, nestled within the bustling Loop District of Chicago. Her days began promptly at 6:30 a.m. in her modest, sun-dappled apartment in Lincoln Park, the aroma of her carefully brewed single-origin coffee mingling with the faint, crisp scent of Lake Michigan carried on the morning breeze. She'd review the financial news, jot down mental notes for her commute, then navigate the L train, her nose buried in a paperback, until the iconic skyline of the Loop rose before her. Eleanor wasn't flashy. She preferred substance over style, facts over flair. Her work, often perceived as dry by outsiders, was her passion. She saw the world in ledgers and spreadsheets, a complex tapestry of numbers that, when read correctly, told an undeniable story. Her colleagues, a mix of seasoned veterans and ambitious fresh-faced graduates, respected her quiet competence. She was the one you went to when you needed to untangle a particularly complex discrepancy, a human algorithm of integrity and precision. She wore practical, well-tailored suits, her dark hair usually pulled back in a neat bun, and her gaze, though often focused inward, missed nothing. She found solace in the methodical, the verifiable, the truth that figures inevitably revealed. Weekends were spent exploring the city's hidden gems, volunteering at a local animal shelter, or simply enjoying the quietude of her apartment, listening to the hum of the city below. It was a life built on order, dedication, and an unshakable belief in fair play. The equilibrium of her well-ordered world shattered with the arrival of Marcus Thorne. Marcus, a man who seemed to have stepped straight out of a glossy corporate magazine, was brought in as the new senior vice president of operations, a position that immediately placed him in a supervisory role over several key departments, including those Eleanor frequently audited. He was handsome, impeccably dressed in custom-tailored suits, with a smile that could charm a snake and an air of supreme self-confidence. He'd arrived from a competitor firm in New York, heralded as a wunderkind, a disruptor, the kind of leader Sterling needed to inject new life into its operations. He was a self-proclaimed perfectionist, often referencing his Virgo astrological sign with a performative chuckle, as if it explained his exacting standards. From day one, Marcus made it clear he operated on a different plane. He demanded rapid results, grand presentations, and a constant stream of positive metrics. Subtlety was lost on him. He craved visible achievements, even if those achievements were built on shaky foundations. Eleanor, ever the pragmatist, found his showmanship tiresome, but initially dismissed it as a difference in corporate cultures. Then, he began to target her. It started subtly. Marcus would question her audit reports in team meetings, dissecting minor phrasing, implying her conclusions were less robust than they should be. He'd suggest alternative ways of presenting data that, to Eleanor's trained eye, verged on obfuscation. He'd make comments like, "Eleanor, your work is thorough, perhaps too thorough. We need to be agile here, not bogged down in minutiae." The implicit message was clear. Her dedication was a liability. The real blow, the moment that seared itself into her memory, occurred during the quarterly executive review in late November 2013. The large, polished mahogany conference room on the 40th floor overlooked a gray, pre-winter Chicago sky, its vast windows reflecting the stern faces of the company's most senior leaders. Eleanor was presenting the findings of a compliance audit she'd conducted on Marcus's department, specifically regarding new regulatory requirements for client data management. It was a dense report, filled with technical specifics, and she had meticulously prepared every slide, every supporting document. She presented her findings with her usual calm objectivity, highlighting areas of noncompliance and recommending specific corrective actions. As she concluded, Marcus leaned forward, a condescending smirk playing on his lips. "Thank you, Eleanor," he began, his voice smooth but laced with a barely concealed edge. "A very comprehensive report, as always." However, I must confess I find some of your observations a tad sloppy. A collective gasp, almost imperceptible, rippled through the room. Eleanor felt a cold dread seize her stomach. Sloppy, she repeated, her voice barely a whisper, her carefully constructed professional composure threatening to crack. Indeed, Marcus continued, oblivious or uncaring of the shock he'd created. For instance, on slide 17, your aggregation of client consent forms from the Q3 intake, while numerically correct, fails to account for the expedited processing initiative we launched in September. Had you bothered to follow up, you'd find our compliance rates are significantly higher, rendering your conclusions alarmist and, frankly, poorly researched. It suggests a lack of attention to detail, a certain sloppiness in your methodology. He paused, letting his words hang heavy in the air, a public execution of her professional credibility. We expect perfection here, Eleanor. Anything less is unacceptable. The executives around the table shifted uncomfortably. Some avoided her gaze, others offered pitying glances. Eleanor felt her face flush, a hot wave of shame washing over her. She knew, deep in her gut, that his claim was a distortion, a cleverly worded lie designed to discredit her and protect his department's image. She had accounted for the expedited processing, had spent hours cross-referencing, only to find the new initiative had actually worsened compliance in its early stages due to rushed implementation. But in that moment, under the harsh glare of the executive committee, with Marcus's confident, dismissive tone ringing in her ears, her defense felt weak, swallowed by the sheer force of his arrogance. She stammered a half-hearted rebuttal, but the damage was done. The word sloppy echoed in her mind, a brand on her professional soul. She finished her presentation in a daze, the remaining slides a blur. That night, Eleanor didn't go home. She walked. For hours, she wandered aimlessly through the frigid Chicago streets, the biting wind off the lake doing little to cool the fire of humiliation burning within her. Lincoln Park, her usual sanctuary, felt distant, unwelcoming. She found herself in a dimly lit bar in River North, ordering a whiskey she rarely drank, the clinking of glasses and low hum of conversation a dull backdrop to the cacophony of her thoughts. Sloppy, the word mocked her, gnawed at her, undermined everything she believed herself to be. She was Eleanor Vance, the meticulous auditor, the woman who found the needle in the haystack, the guardian of integrity. And he had called her sloppy, publicly, deliberately. Tears, hot and unexpected, streamed down her face. She felt an overwhelming sense of injustice, of professional violation. She thought about quitting, about packing her bags and leaving Chicago, escaping the shame. The idea of facing Marcus, of continuing to work under his patronizing gaze, was unbearable. She had dedicated 10 years to Sterling, building her reputation brick by painstaking brick, and in a single, brutal moment, he had tried to demolish it. But amidst the despair, a tiny ember flickered. It wasn't just anger. It was a cold, calculated fury that began to crystallize into resolve. She wasn't sloppy. She was thorough. And Marcus, with his smooth pronouncements and his perfect facade, was the very antithesis of thoroughness. His perfection was a performance, a carefully constructed illusion, and Eleanor, the auditor, knew exactly how to dismantle illusions. She wiped her eyes, took a deep breath, and felt a steel resolve settle in her bones. She wouldn't quit. She would fight with the only weapon she truly possessed, the truth. The following weeks were a blur of quiet, intense preparation. Eleanor continued her regular duties, her demeanor outwardly unchanged, but internally a quiet war was brewing. She began to observe Marcus Thorne with a new, clinical intensity. She watched his interactions, studied his reports, listened to the casual boasts he made in the hallway. She noticed patterns. His departments consistently reported slightly inflated positive metrics. His project timelines always seemed to be on track, until the very last minute, and any issues were quickly swept under the rug with a wave of his hand and a confident, reassuring speech. He was a master of managing perception, not necessarily results. Eleanor realized her greatest advantage lay in her very nature as an auditor. While Marcus focused on the grand narrative, she thrived in the granular. She understood Sterling's internal financial systems, its regulatory obligations, its myriad of convoluted internal policies better than anyone. She knew where the bodies were buried, metaphorically speaking, because she was often the one tasked with finding them. Her plan began to take shape, born from her indignation and sharpened by her professional acumen. She would conduct her own, unofficial, comprehensive audit of Marcus Thorne's perfect empire. It wasn't a reckless endeavor. Eleanor couldn't just launch a rogue investigation. She had to be subtle, systematic, and utterly undetectable. She began by leveraging her legitimate access. As an internal auditor, she had broad permissions across various departments' financial records, expense reports, project management software, and HR files. She started with the expedited processing initiative Marcus had used to publicly shame her. She revisited the data, digging deeper, cross-referencing with vendor invoices, payroll records for temporary staff, and even internal communication logs. She found that while the initiative had indeed been launched, its initial phase was plagued by overlooked compliance steps. Exactly as her original report had indicated, only Marcus had strategically cherry-picked data points from after the initial chaotic rollout to make his case. This was just the first thread. Eleanor expanded her scope. After hours, when the office was quiet, illuminated only by the glow of her monitor, she would systematically delve into Marcus's department. She examined budget allocations versus actual expenditures, looking for discrepancies. She found instances where project overruns were quietly reclassified under different budget codes, making his projects appear more cost-efficient than they were. She cross-referenced vendor contracts Marcus's team had signed with the company's approved vendor list and found several instances of unapproved, higher-cost third-party providers, justified with flimsy expediency clauses. Her investigation wasn't just about financial impropriety. It was about exposing the systemic sloppiness that Marcus so vehemently condemned in others while fostering it in his own domain. She looked at key performance indicators, KPIs for his projects. Marcus was a huge proponent of aggressive KPIs, often touting his team's superior performance. Eleanor meticulously tracked these, comparing reported progress with tangible deliverables, client feedback surveys, and even internal development logs. She uncovered a pattern of inflated metrics. Projects reported as 90% complete that were still missing critical components, or client satisfaction scores that mysteriously soared after a particular week, only to dip again when follow-up surveys were ignored. He wasn't just misrepresenting data, he was actively creating a narrative of success that didn't align with reality. She worked tirelessly, fueled by coffee and a burning desire for vindication. Her apartment became a war room, scattered with printed reports, highlighted spreadsheets, and flowcharts tracking inconsistencies. She learned the nuances of his team's operations, the shortcuts they took, the corners they cut, all under the directive of a supervisor who prized image over integrity. She discovered that Marcus often pushed for rapid deployments of new initiatives without adequate testing or compliance checks, creating a high-risk environment for the company. He then demanded his team cover up any immediate failures to maintain his pristine image. One particularly damning discovery involved a large software implementation project Marcus oversaw. He had repeatedly assured the executive committee that the project was on schedule and under budget. Eleanor, however, by cross-referencing the internal bug tracking system, developer time logs, and actual deployment dates across different client groups, found a critical flaw. The initial rollout was riddled with errors that required significant, unbudgeted overtime and a quiet, hurried patch-up effort that was never properly documented in official reports. Marcus had instructed his project lead to delay reporting the true cost and timeline overruns until a new fiscal quarter, essentially burying the problem to protect his Q4 performance review. This wasn't just sloppy. It was deliberate deception. Eleanor built her case brick by brick, each piece of evidence meticulously documented, cross-referenced, and ready to be presented. She wasn't seeking to destroy Marcus out of spite. She was simply doing her job, but with a laser focus directed at the very man who had questioned her integrity. She wasn't just looking for errors. She was looking for his errors, the ones carefully hidden beneath layers of corporate polish and self-aggrandizement. Her audit would be irrefutable, unassailable, and utterly devastating. The opportunity came in January 2014 with the annual comprehensive internal audit, a mandatory deep dive into all departments' financial and operational health. Due to a departmental reshuffle and her reputation for tackling complex issues, Eleanor was assigned as the lead auditor for the operations division, Marcus Thorne's domain. It was a stroke of strategic luck, or perhaps destiny. She felt a surge of cold satisfaction. The chessboard was set. Eleanor approached the official audit with the same meticulousness, but now armed with an arsenal of hidden knowledge. She began with the official review of Marcus's department. Her requests for documentation were precise, targeting the very areas where she knew he had inconsistencies. When his team provided their usual polished reports, Eleanor didn't immediately challenge them. Instead, she used them as a baseline, then systematically requested underlying data, raw figures, and historical records that she already knew contradicted the official narrative. The audit progressed methodically. She asked for specific expense reports, comparing them with her personal notes on reclassified budget codes. She questioned the methodology of their KPI calculations, demanding the raw data inputs and algorithms used. She pointed out the disparities between reported project completion rates and the actual state of deliverables. Referencing internal emails and even a few anonymous tips she had subtly solicited about process inefficiencies over the past few weeks. Marcus, initially dismissive, grew increasingly agitated. He tried his usual tactics: smooth explanations, attempts to redirect, even thinly veiled threats about hampering operational efficiency. But Eleanor was unyielding. Her questions were sharp, her gaze unwavering, and every time he tried to deflect, she presented another piece of undeniable evidence, not as an accusation, but as a neutral data point discrepancy. The climax arrived in a final presentation to the C-suite and the head of internal audit, a stoic woman named Sarah Chen. This wasn't a casual meeting. It was a formal review of the audit findings, with Marcus and his direct reports present. The room was tense, the air thick with unspoken expectations. Eleanor stood before them, a projector illuminating her meticulously prepared slides. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't show emotion. She simply presented the facts. "Good morning," she began, her voice calm and steady. "This audit report covers the fiscal year 2013 for the Operations Division, led by Mr. Marcus Thorne. My findings focus on compliance, financial transparency, and operational efficiency." She started with the less egregious issues, gradually building her case. Then, she unveiled her core findings. "Exhibit A," she clicked, and a slide appeared showing the reclassified expenses for the software implementation project. "My audit found over $750,000 in project overruns for the Project Phoenix initiative that were reallocated to general IT infrastructure maintenance in Q4. This reclassification artificially lowered Project Phoenix's reported costs, masking significant budget deviations. The original approval for this reallocation is absent from our records, suggesting a lack of proper authorization." Marcus interjected. "That was a strategic decision to streamline reporting, Eleanor, not an attempt to hide anything." Eleanor didn't miss a beat. "Strategic decisions, Mr. Thorne, typically require formal documentation and approval from the CFO's office. This was not present. Furthermore, Exhibit B," she clicked again, "shows the actual development hours and bug fixes recorded in our internal systems, which contradict the on-track status reported in your Q3 and Q4 updates. The project experienced significant delays and required unbudgeted overtime to meet even the revised timeline, information that was not adequately communicated to stakeholders. She moved on. Exhibit C, Vendor Compliance. My audit identified 5 instances where unapproved, high-cost third-party vendors were utilized for critical services, bypassing standard procurement protocols. The rationale provided was expediency, yet comparative analysis shows these vendors charged, on average, 15% more than our approved partners for similar services, resulting in an additional $200,000 in unnecessary expenditure. Each slide was a precise, surgical strike. She detailed the inflated KPIs, showing how raw data was manipulated to present a more favorable picture. She exposed the lax compliance regarding client data management, referencing the very expedited processing initiative Marcus had used to brand her as sloppy, now presenting the full, unvarnished truth of its initial chaotic rollout and subsequent, quiet efforts to rectify it. She had emails, spreadsheets, signed documents, and even internal chat logs, obtained legitimately through IT access logs for project communications, to back up every single claim. By the time she reached her conclusion, the room was silent, save for the hum of the projector. Marcus, who had started with an air of annoyance, now sat pale, his perfect facade crumbling. His initial attempts at deflection had withered under the relentless barrage of irrefutable data. The perfect errors he had so carefully constructed to maintain his image were now exposed, one by devastating one. In summary, Eleanor concluded, her voice devoid of triumph. The operations division, under Mr. Thorne's leadership, has shown a consistent pattern of noncompliance with internal financial policies, misrepresentation of project progress and costs, and a systemic lack of transparency. These actions have not only created financial inefficiencies, but have also exposed Sterling Financial Group to significant regulatory and reputational risks. The internal controls designed to prevent such occurrences were circumvented or ignored. Sarah Chen, the head of internal audit, spoke first. Her voice was quiet but carried immense authority. Thank you, Eleanor. The thoroughness of this report is, frankly, exceptional. She turned her gaze to Marcus, her expression unreadable. Mr. Thorne, do you have any rebuttal for these findings? Marcus stammered, his usual eloquence gone, replaced by a desperate, fumbling attempt to rationalize. These are minor discrepancies, overzealous interpretations. We're a fast-moving division. Sometimes you have to cut corners to get results. Cutting corners, Mr. Thorne, Eleanor interjected, her voice still calm, is precisely what leads to sloppy work. The word hung in the air, a final, poignant echo of his past insult. The consequences were swift and severe. Within a week, Marcus Thorne was placed on administrative leave, pending a deeper external investigation. By the end of the month, he was gone, terminated for gross misconduct and a pattern of deceptive practices that severely jeopardized the company. His perfect career at Sterling Financial Group had imploded, shattered by the very sloppiness he had so readily projected onto others. Eleanor didn't celebrate. There was no triumphant dance, no gloating. The satisfaction she felt was deeper, more profound. It was the satisfaction of truth prevailing, of integrity affirmed. Her reputation, once bruised, was now not just restored but elevated. Colleagues who had once offered pitying glances now looked at her with respect, even awe. Sarah Chen personally commended her, acknowledging her unwavering dedication and the sheer precision of her work. Life slowly returned to its quiet rhythm, but with a new layer of confidence. Eleanor still brewed her coffee at 6:30 a.m., still took the L train, still found solace in the methodical. But as she walked by Lake Michigan, the crisp air clearing her thoughts, she carried a subtle shift within her. She had faced injustice, endured humiliation, and responded not with anger, but with the cold, unyielding power of facts. She had shown them that true perfection wasn't about appearances. It was about the meticulous, often unseen, dedication to truth. And sometimes, The most precise revenge was simply doing your job flawlessly. She was Eleanor Vance, the meticulous auditor, and no one ever again would dare call her sloppy.